Hey there, YouTube. I'm Ikitsu. This is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire. So today we're going to be talking about the Takadaran Command Fortress, which is one of the super heavy capital ships, one of the command ships for the Tech faction, the Tech Enclave in particular. And this is a combination ship. It's got a lot going for it. So it's partly a heavy Bastion warship. It's capable of dishing out a lot of damage. It's part war factory. It's capable of building your lighter ships, anything below capital. And it's also part command ship that's capable of leading the battle and taking control of things by giving large coordinated buffs to your fleet. It's a very, very good ship that works really, really well with the ideas that are going on in Tech Enclave. So let's take a look at this thing.
Strategic operations standing by.
We've got 600 durability, 5,850 shield points, 4,205 armor points, and 8,500 hull points, 335 antimatter, and it starts off with 3 wings of fighters. For hidden statistics, we're looking at a pretty okay 85 armor strength. Honestly, I kind of thought that the ship would be one of the ones with the higher armor values, but 85 is still fine. It's just surprisingly low for what it is. Maximum speed of 575, which is very slow, but that's relatively okay for it. And for weapons, we're looking at 4 rapid fire beams at 25 damage per second with 500 pierce. It's got 10 medium autocannons at 8 damage per second with 200 pierce. The rapid fire beams are 100 damage per second total. The medium autocannons are 80 damage total. And then you've got 14 PD autocannons at 4 damage per second each for a total of 56 damage per second at 0 pierce. So this is something that's got a relatively good amount of firepower, but relatively poor scaling on its firepower. We'll get a little bit into that, but good convergence on the guns here. We're looking at a situation where we've got our main guns all facing forward here. The autocannons are also situated in ways that mostly all fire forward here as well, giving it pretty good coverage with those. So you can focus down pretty much whatever it is you're after. The point defenses obviously are scattered around the hull in a little bit more sort of awkward ways there. And we do have these 2 rear-facing autocannons that are a little bit more obscured, so a little bit less damage than it looks like, but honestly most of it's going forward. So this is a very decent ship for just slugging it out, but it's nothing fantastic. It's not like the best of the killers out there, but as far as like burning down a capital ship, you could definitely do worse than 100 damage per second. Like that's really, really good. For its cost and everything though, it's nothing too special. So let's look at its abilities. This is where it starts to shine, because it's actually supposed to be a support type vessel, but it just happens to be one that's pretty good at brawling. You got coordinated attack. This has a cooldown of 2 minutes, and it scales down to 60 seconds, an antimatter cost of 125, scaling up to 150, getting more expensive over time, and also faster to cast, makes it harder to cast as you go on. Radius of 10,000 going up to 15,000, duration of 60 seconds, and it stays at 60 seconds, meaning that you can get 100% uptime on this. What this does is it gives your corvettes, frigates, and cruisers, so notably not your capital ships, not your Titan, and not your command ships, weapon reload bonuses, as well as secondary bonuses. For corvettes, the bonus is the highest at 15% at first level, scaling up to 40% at maximum. Then you got frigates starting at 10 going up to 35, and then you got cruisers at 5 going up to 30. So the smaller your ships, the bigger the benefits are, arguably speaking. Corvettes get their maximum speed increased, and it also scales in exactly the same sort of way there. Frigates also get a max turn speed bonus, going up in the same sort of way there, up to 35%. And cruisers get ability antimatter cost reduction, which only matters really for the Hoshiko. Technically, you have castable abilities on some of your others, like the Javelin has got its armor breaker missile, but those typically don't run out of antimatter that badly, so it doesn't matter as much that they're getting the ability antimatter cost thing. This is really to help out the Hoshiko since they don't have a weapon. So notably, this is a very, very powerful ability once you're sort of in that stage of the game where you're expecting to have lots of cruisers, lots of corvettes, lots of frigates. And an interesting thing about this is it has a lot of self-synergy, because even if you are at the point in time where you're going 100% capitals, this ship is still capable of getting some good value out of this. Because of its ultimate, basically, you're capable of getting a bunch of extra supply worth of cruisers and frigates that are going to be benefiting from coordinated attack. And it's not a small amount in the super, super late game. If you're in that hyper late game, 3 of these guys working together can put out a lot of extra ships because they can go over your supply cap. Next thing is hold the line. It's got a cooldown of 90 seconds, and it scales down to 65. Antimatter cost is 75, going up to 125, with a radius of going from 10,000 to 15,000. Same as the coordinated attack. And then it's got a reduction on damage taken for ships of minus 10%, going up to minus 35 at maximum level. but your structures and star bases take 20% less, scaling up to 45% less at maximum level. So this is a really powerful ability. Unlike the other one, this does also reduce the damage that your capital ships take, which is a pretty good mitigation factor. It's probably the more powerful of the two abilities, and it gets to nearly 100% uptime. I don't think that you need to have all three of your guys have this, though, and we'll sort of get into that when we talk about builds. But this is a pretty powerful ability, making it so that your entire fleet survives a lot longer, and notably making it harder to snipe out your capitals. Magnetic Overshield is its next ability. This one's a bit weird. It's got a cooldown of 60 seconds, antimatter cost of 25, and a duration of 50 seconds, and those stats do not change at all. What it does is it prevents damage. It goes from 40% scaling all the way up to 90% in what it does there. But you do lose antimatter for every point of damage that you prevent. So for 100 points of damage, you lose a single point of antimatter. So at maximum level, let's say you take a shot that's worth 1,000 damage, you'll reduce that to 900 damage, or you'll reduce that by 900 damage. Sorry, so you'll take 100, and then 1% of that will get converted over into antimatter. So that 1,000 points of damage hit will only cost you 100 hit points and 9 antimatter. So virtually nothing. Very, very good ability. Very powerful, making it so that the ship is capable of standing out in the front lines, getting absolutely wailed on, but it also means that every point of antimatter that gets stripped away from you by something that strips antimatter is you losing 100 hit points, which is really, really brutal. So you do want to make sure that this ship is not taking that kind of damage, but there's not really a whole lot you can do about it. Conversely, every time you get healed by Hoshiko, you're getting 100 hit points per antimatter that it gives you. So this thing is capable of producing Hoshikos, so just having it pop out of the factory, instantly giving this guy more antimatter and making it so that he's just restored that much health right out of the gate, extremely powerful. Even if the Hoshiko gets popped, like just very shortly right after that, Magnetic Overshield is keeping this thing alive really, really effectively, and it's very hard to outdrain the effect of Magnetic Overshield because you're able to sort of regain your own antimatter pool through that method. Very, very good effect. Next one is Tactical Reserve Fleet. I sort of alluded to this earlier. It's got a cooldown of 11 minutes. It's got an antimatter cost of 100, and it scales up to 150. The cooldown stays the same. And what it does, it produces 200 supply of ships. At the second level of this, it produces 500 supply of ships. It's got an arrival delay of 10 seconds, so you don't get the ships immediately. But once you do, they'll stay with the planet. They do not use supply, and they will leave once all the enemies have been destroyed. The interesting thing about that part is if you're in a situation where you're in a really long fight or your opponent's got some static stuff where they are locked in for whatever reason, you could hypothetically like armistice chain for 11 minutes and then cast this again. I don't think that's practical, and I don't think that anyone would realistically do that. But if you really wanted to, you could theoretically, I think, do that. I don't actually know if that works because that sounds like a nightmare to set up, and I don't want to. But still, even just 3 of these guys casting this once each, that's 1,500 fleet supply. That's basically like 3/4 of your cap just from this ability. So you're capable of just summoning a massive, massive fleet. And this is why I was saying that even if you're all capitals, coordinated attack is still extremely valuable for these guys because they're able to boost up all the stuff from the tactical reserve fleets, making it so that those guys are really, really a problem to deal with. And not only that, but they're the ones that are getting this sort of attack boost, so they're hitting harder. They're also getting that hold the line thing, so it's not like you can kill them easily either. So all the abilities of this thing synergize with itself quite well, making it so that, like, yeah, you could focus down, like, the command ships themselves, but they're really, really hard to kill. These two abilities here make them exceptionally hard to kill. They're making it so that these smaller ships are dealing, like, way more damage, but those are free, and they can just sort of call them in whenever they want. And they're also a little bit more durable. So you have to really decide how you're going to approach this thing, especially because you can't easily just antimatter drain them to death. I think there's a lot to like about the way that this is set up here. Now, we do also want to go over its unique equipment. Both the Tech Enclave and Tech Primacy, they've got unique items for their command ships that are one choice only. In this case, it's because this is a sort of like refurbished supply ship that's got these sort of cargo pods, and you can sort of have a module installed in that cargo pod slot. So the first one would be the Advanced Missile Refit. This is actually one of the strongest single one and done weapon upgrades in the game. It adds 2 advanced missiles to the ship at 60 damage per second each for a total of 120 with 600 pierce. So there are advent items that will outscale an advanced missile refit, but not on their own. Those items are like the Vex amplifier or something like that. Those ones can do more damage than the advanced missile refit, but not if you just get the Vex amplifier by itself. You need to give it a whole bunch of other things for that to really kick off. This thing, just slapping it on there by itself, is a really, really high amount of extra armor piercing damage, and it puts you into the sort of stage where you're contesting against other command class ships. Now, with just the advanced missile refit and your beams and stuff like that, an Oblivion is still going to annihilate you. Don't think that you're like punching into that sort of tier, but you're still much, much stronger than you were without it as far as like frontline combat goes. So I do think that this is an important sort of thing to consider with these guys. The next one that goes in the same slot is the cargo factory supplies. This makes it so that you're producing stuff 50% faster. And I believe that it works with counter deployment if you're in an opponent's face there, meaning that you can actually like build stuff ridiculously quickly when you're on the offensive with this faction if you've got a cargo factory supplies. I don't necessarily think this is the best thing to put on all these guys, but I think that having something that can do that can be really, really strong. Those build times become very, very fast with that. The next one is antimatter reserves. By the way that the ship build time works is that like minus 50% doesn't mean it builds 50% faster. It's 100 is 50% faster. It works in the same way that like armor or durability scaling works. It's kind of weird. I don't like the math, and I wish it was done differently, but they did it the way they did it, so whatever. It does mean that no matter how high the ship build time reduction goes, though, you'll never actually have a 0-second build time. The next one, however, is cargo antimatter reserves, and this one's technically kind of weak by itself, but it has some really strong elements to it. So this one increases your maximum antimatter by 50%, and it gives you 25% extra antimatter regeneration. The reason I think this is kind of weak is that it doesn't do anything unique. The antimatter engine gives you plus 100% antimatter and then gives you that sort of like antimatter restore burst once every 4 minutes. Arguably, the antimatter engine is going to be stronger most of the time. The antimatter reserves, though, with the passive regeneration can be pretty strong as well. But the thing is, you can combine the two of them. And if you do that, this thing can just sort of sit there with magnetic overshield turned on, and it will just not die. It will just be able to sit there, and it will be able to tank basically forever. Even if you're draining a bunch of its antimatter, it's regenerating it really, really quickly. So it's very, very tough to kill the ship once it gets into that sort of cycle. So that's what the antimatter reserves are for. That's probably why they're a little bit weaker. It's because they don't want that combination to get a little bit too oppressive there. So you've got your offensive option, what it would be a supportive type ability there, and what I would actually argue is defensive, in spite of the fact that antimatter is usually considered like part of your casting rotation. In this case, I think it's really for powering magnetic overshield. So those all sort of tie into the way that you're going to be using this, because you can only have one of those 3 items. So for military research, this thing works interestingly with the garrison expansion. If you've got a bunch of garrisons slammed down on a bunch of your planets, you can actually have this thing like hyper crank out a ton of units. Like one of the things you could even do if you're going absolutely crazy, you could go out there, you could have the cargo factory supplies, so they don't cost you an exotic or anything like that. So you could just chuck that on here. It does cost a lot, but once you've sort of built a whole bunch of stuff, you can just chuck it off and then get like a missile if you want to get that for fighting. And then when you go back to building, you could go back to having the factory supplies. But regardless, when you've got that going on and you've got yourself in a situation where you're using your garrison mechanic, you can use this thing to produce a whole bunch of cruisers in a system that doesn't have a heavy factory, and you can do it really, really, really quickly. Especially if you've got all 3 Takadarans all at once there. Now, it does depend on what you sort of research, but you could end up with like a bunch of frigates or corvettes. So if you're planning on sort of going with that, make sure you've only researched the ships that you actually want. Don't sort of like dip into a ship that you're not really invested in, because unfortunately they will spew out ships that you don't like if you have them researched there. So a very interesting sort of ability that this has. It's sort of similar to the Sova. The problem with the Sova is that it's only capable of building corvettes. So it's capable of letting you sort of build a bunch of light ships into the system if you want to have that as your garrison. But if you want to have the heavier ships available, like the Harker or the Javelus, then you have to go for the Takadaran at the very least there. And you also have to have heavy garrison researched. Now, you do also have the ship experience ones. I think they're over here, basic and advanced crew training. So this ship, I think, actually really benefits from having level 2. It'd be nice if, of course, you could start these guys at level 3. That would actually be a much better breakpoint. But since your level ups cost a little bit more, you start off at maximum level 2. So this thing, being able to include a magnetic overshield in whichever build you're doing, makes it so much harder to focus one of these guys down. So if you're building one that's designed for hold the line, you take the secondary magnetic overshield, and if they decide to focus it down, you can pop that, and this thing becomes really, really hard to kill, even with just the one level of it. If you're going for one that's going coordinated attack, you could still take magnetic overshield, and you can have it become really, really hard to kill if they try to focus it down in that situation. So level 2 makes a big difference in terms of survivability, because I wouldn't necessarily want to go magnetic overshield first. I get a lot more utility or overall fleet strength from something like hold the line or something like coordinated attack. So this is definitely a secondary effect as far as I'm concerned. Now for weapons, you're looking at a situation where you're kind of gonna like the advanced ballistics because you've got 80 damage per second on those ballistic weapons, but they're not really the thing that this thing is for. So I also wouldn't really want the big auto loaders unless I was focusing on them and the point defense. It is really nice to be able to fire your point defense guns faster, so it does benefit from that. It would actually be kind of nice if this ship had 4 Gauss cannons instead of lasers. The reason is that, like, even though your upgrades are kind of trash, like, if you were able to get 100 damage per second with the Gauss weapons, you could then put on, like, the heavy Gauss slugs, and that would actually make them really, really strong. As it is, unfortunately, you've got these lasers, and while 25% is mediocre at best, it's not great, there's no item for you to boost your laser damage. Now, there are things that can boost your missile damage, and they're pretty okay. But unfortunately, the item that you add to this missile guidance computer, I don't know if I would actually add that to this ship. There's other ships that I would add it to first because it's an aura. So you can just add it to some sort of like ship that sits in the background there and helps out in that sort of way. Of course, you also gain benefits from things like the modular equipment bay if you're going for flak bursts in the late game. Now, for this ship, you are really big, you are really tough, and you are going to be able to take a lot of damage. I do think that the armor bonuses, because your armor is quite high, is really, really good here. I do think that just having your hull reinforcements is kind of okay there. But one of the things that I do like with this ship is going for something like, say, these things, the ablative armor or the reactive armor plating. So having access to those is going to help quite a bit there. Advanced maneuvering does technically help these guys. They're not really the fastest or most maneuverable. Even with this, you're probably not going to get away from the enemy. They do really want antimatter, so the reaction chaining is going to be important for this guy. The antimatter engine is going to be really good for this guy. The shields, you do want the burst for this guy. It has a lot of hit points. It has a lot of armor and stuff like that. It's probably going to be getting repaired by Hoshiko's. There's a lot of reasons why this thing wants shield burst, because every time it sort of like does that, it gives it a chance to replenish its armor. Then its shields go down, and then the armor gives it time for it to get its shields back, and that sort of cycles back and forth. So that's one of those things that is really nice on ships with shield burst that also have very high armor. So yeah, like the techs here pretty much just want all of them. The usual sort of case of this kind of thing. Now, I did mention briefly counter deployment is really, really good with this thing. I think that you also look at things like labor negotiations. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to put industrial complex on it, which is unfortunate. But you do also have like the industrial juggernaut that also helps out here. Be very powerful for this particular ship. And for culture, all you're really looking at is your maximum speed bonuses. I should do a special shout out because I don't usually talk about trade for the other factions, but this ship really does want you to have a fairly good trade value. And the reason that it wants that strong economy so much is because you are going to be pushing out a lot of these ships while you're fighting, generally speaking, with this ship, because that does extend their abilities by quite a bit and makes it so that they're better at fighting by quite a bit there. So when I was talking about this thing not having the best scaling for its weapons there, I was mostly talking about it not having the best items for that. But let's talk a little bit about builds, and we'll sort of go over why we can't really improve those. So one of them, I think that you build all three of these differently from each other. I think that if you have one that's got like coordinated attack, hold the line, that's really, really good. But if you do that, and that's sort of how they're all built there, then you're missing out on the really high benefits of magnetic overshield. And these things have 100% uptime if you've got it like one of them leveled up all the way, and then if you got the other one leveled up all the way, that's also got basically 100% over activation. So what I think you do is you have one guy go coordinate attack and then magnetic overshield, and then you have another guy hold the line magnetic overshield, and then you have one last one that is coordinate attack and hold the line, but you keep that one on hold position and you have it sit in the way back of your fleet so that's not really feasible for your enemy to get at it. And you only push it forward into combat if it's really safe for it to go there, because it's not going to be able to get the benefit of magnetic overshield. And if you do this setup, what you can do is you can have the one in the back cast coordinate attack and hold the line, because the radius is huge. You can be quite far away from the main front line there. And you could sort of have like the two frontliners focusing on magnetic overshield while using their guns to deal damage to the enemy. So for the two frontliners, what I would do is I would go for the advanced missile refit, because they're getting a lot of their survivability from magnetic overshield, and they're getting a lot of survivability from hold the line being cast by the other guy that's behind them. So they can go for the advanced missile refit relatively safely instead of going for the antimatter reserves. And obviously if they're frontlining, they don't want to take the cargo factory supplies. Now, you do have access to the missile guidance computer. Like I said, this is an aura. I don't think you put it on these guys. I think you put it on someone else, even though you're using missiles on these guys. The benefit of this, that plus 10% damage, still applies to the ship if, like, a Marza is hanging around it and is giving him access to that. The one that's in the very, very back there, I would consider giving the targeting array so that it's got something to do while it's way back there. Just gives their guns a little bit more range that they could potentially be firing while outside of combat distances there. Rapid autoloader is something I would consider for the frontliners. It does make their point defense guns go absolutely crazy, and it does give their other guns something to do, but I would only do that if I really felt like I was kind of safe with these guys, because we're going to sort of count the slots here. We definitely want core systems armor, plus 25% max armor points and hull points, on something where I don't think, did I talk about the numbers here? Like, it's got really high armor points. 4,205, that's crazy. Like, that's a humongous amount of armor. So an extra 25% of that, extra 25% to hull, those are really, really good. I would probably get the combat repair system. This gives us that plus 200% hull regeneration in combat, meaning that we're passively increasing our hull regeneration. And it does let us sort of like bounce back and get our shields back. Unfortunately, we don't have armor passive regeneration, but it's still pretty good. So I'd get those two. And then, of course, you've got the choice between ablative and reactive plating. Generally speaking, I think that this one does better with the ablative. The reason is that like laser type weapons are going to be more of a threat to it than missiles. But in this case, you may also want to just get it for the armor strength, especially if you're up against someone like Advent. Advent needs to crack this thing with plasma to a large extent, not lasers. Whereas, like, against Vasari, you're probably looking at something like the Volcaris to penetrate something like this here, or you're looking at Gauss weapons if you're up against Tech. So, in that case, you stick with reactive plating. So, that's like 3 of our items and a 4th one over here. That's already almost all of our items. After that, I don't think you go War Reporter. Obviously, you're not allowed to go for these 2, but I would get the antimatter engine. And that just leaves us with 1 more slot. So, we've gone for, like, 4 utility defense and then 1 offense. And at this point we decide, are we going to take like the rapid autoloader, or are we going to take like flak burst? Those are my 2 choices, generally speaking. And in some situations you're going to want flak burst, and in some situations you're going to want the rapid autoloader. It's just going to depend on sort of what situation you're kind of finding yourself in there. Now, for the one that's in the back that is just casting hold the line and coordinate attack and is not in the fight, like I said, I would definitely consider the targeting array, giving that extra 25% on weapon range. Makes it so that this thing can just sit way in the back there and plug away with like some shots without having to really expose themselves to danger as much. But that could still backfire under certain circumstances. I would also consider maybe getting a reserve squadron hangar, but there's no real synergy for that with this ship either. I would still give this thing the defensive trio. You give it the cargo factory supplies, and you give it the antimatter generator. The thing about this one is you never, ever, ever give it like the flak burst, because it's way in the back, so it's not going to be able to use it effectively. And you don't give it the missile guidance computer, definitely, and you don't give it the rapid autoloader. So it becomes like these 2 items, and then it becomes like these 3 items for 5, and then you've got access to like maybe this, depending on the situation you find yourself in. So I think that that's sort of the best way to build these guys. That way, the one in the back is like capable of putting all of its antimatter into those sort of like abilities that are capable of pushing out buffs for your entire fleet there, without having to expose it to any danger or as much danger anyway. And the ones in the front are capable of like dishing out a lot of damage while being really really hard to kill. Now if your opponent does decide to dive past the first two, and this is why I like the way that I do this build, if your opponent decides to dive past the first two and really 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 go after that third one, if they're still actually capable of getting to that third one actually being a significant enough threat that you kind of feel that even though you've got hold the line reducing the damage by 35%, you can turn off in that instance like your abilities for this guy, and just have him run away or whatever if you have to, although they're pretty bad at that, but you run away a bit early. And you have the other two take up the duty because they're not getting shot at if they're trying to dive past and get after this third Takadaran that's in the back there. The ones in the front can do hold the line and they can use coordinated attack now. And they're not going to be able to do a magnetic overshield as much anymore. They're not going to be able to do it as efficiently. But the hope here is if your opponent has dove past the front line so desperately to get this backline one, instead of just killing the front line Takadarans, then you should be able to like kill enough of their fleet while they're out of position that you've got enough of an advantage that you can sort of win the fight afterwards. That's the hope anyway. But it does mean that even if you do have to retreat with that third Takadaran that's in the back, you still have the full effect of hold the line, you still have the full effect of coordinated attack. So I think that that works really, really well. I don't think there's any reason whatsoever to go like all three of them having like the same ability because you're not going to get the overlapping effects there. They have the same duration, so you're just going to end up with like null bonuses at that point in time. The argument for getting like a lot of overlap between all these abilities though would be that you want the durations to be shorter earlier because being able to cast these from two ships does make it so you can cast them like twice as often, so you can have coordinated attack 100% of the time at level 1. But I don't think it's really worth having up 100% of the time at level 1. You're only getting 15% weapon reload. That's pretty good, but it's nothing amazing. And that's on Corvettes. Like, if you've got cruisers, you're only getting 5% bonus damage. That's not really that much. So I think that that's probably the way I would consider using the Takadaran Command Fortress. I think this is a really strong unit. I think it's got a lot of interesting things you can do with it. I don't think its strength is necessarily like it's super obvious sort of thing there, because there's so much innate synergy to all of its abilities working together, including the fact that it's capable of building stuff, the fact that it's able to like get more hit points, get more antimatter, but also put more damage that it's capable of then buffing onto the table. Like that's really, really strong in conjunction with all of these abilities. The fact that it's impossible practically to decide to focus these guys down to get rid of the bonuses is really, really strong. So I think that this is probably one of my sort of favorite ship designs for just having everything click, kind of, because there's a lot of ships out there that are good or even better than this one, but they don't have their ability sort of circle around in a way that makes it so that every element of it helps other elements of it, and also makes it so that like having three of them like help each other in such an interesting way. I also don't usually see ships where I like all three abilities on them, so I think this is a really well designed ship for the way that this is supposed to work. So anyhow, I hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.